This is a book about the governance of the Paris metropolitan region. Why so interesting? Well, because of course the Paris metropolitan region is one of the leading metropolitan area in Europe, with London, Moscow, Istanbul, but nowadays probably the capital or the most important one of the European Union. It's part of an intellectual project we started in the Center for European Politics and European Studies and Comparative Politics and the Urban School. And the point was to be able to say something more specific about what does it mean to govern this metropolitan area. In the literature, lots of people tell, you know, those big cities, lots of people come in and come out. You have lots of failures in terms of planning. They are all messy, therefore they are ungovernable. We think otherwise. By contrast, we have tried to argue in a project called WIG, what is governed and not governed, that those metropoles, such as Paris, have a long history to start with. There are some element structuring the type of governance, number one. Second, that there are, of course, failures of governance that we need to study, but you also have a big diversity of forms of collective action in order to deal with some issues, to protect the interest of some powerful group, to exclude some poor people, or by contrast, to deal with forms of inequality, to develop forms of infrastructure. In Paris, like in other metropolis in Europe, often in the rest of the world, over the last 2 or 3 decades, more and more resources have been accumulated. Resources in terms of budget, in terms of expertise, in terms of mobilization of citizens, in terms of capacity to elaborate collective action. That's what we try to analyze in this book. In order to do that, there's a group of young research scholars, young academics that have been working with us one way or another, and we try to deal with different issues. First point is that we try to stress the fact that historically, the governance of Paris is really based upon 2 pillars. Pillar number 1, Paris has always been a problem for the French state. And the French centralization, it was always difficult for the elite to deal with these messy suburbs, this working class developing beyond the frontiers of the center of the municipality of Paris, or with migrants coming in, with a lack of infrastructure. So the issues of economic development, planning, organization of state services, organization of infrastructure, make the metropolitan area governable has been the subject of intense activity by various services of the state over the years. And this has increased dramatically in the 1960s, and that's one part of the book we try to emphasize how the state has made, partly, with contradictions, part of Paris governable, including in terms of policing and transport. The second pillar of the governance of the Paris region, very well known by historians, is this opposition, this conflict between the Paris municipality, 2 million people, and the rest of the metropolitan area that we call the region, 12 million people. Historically, this opposition conflict has been absolutely central to understand the transformation of the Paris urban region. The theme of the book is to argue that those 2 pillars are still there, but we are gradually, incrementally, in a messy way, evolving towards the different forms of governance, where the frontiers of the municipality of Paris are only one line. The new Grand Paris Express, a number of big urban projects in the suburbs, the housing price increase, the way of life of a young generation, the issue related to the climate crisis, a number of issues are more and more central, and progressively the frontier between Paris and the suburb is evolving, is getting less central, and more exchange and way of understanding and elaborating solutions are developing beyond the classic frontiers. Also, from the point of view of a state, we had long-term decentralization reforms in France that started in the 80s, and progressively, the city of Paris has accumulated enormous resources, but also other local authorities, intercommunal bodies, and the region, Île-de-France, has become a major actor to organize part of the public policy to try to intervene on the question of employment, of higher education, or to try to contribute to limit inequalities at that scale. So all in all, that's the theme of the book, is trying to make sense of the Paris in the making, in the sense of the metropolitan region, with this uneasy bricolage of forms of governance that are taking place. This is an unstable order in the making, full of conflict, but not ungovernable and not changing every day. You have robust institutions, you have robust inequalities that are structuring lines of cleavages along ethnic groups, religion sometimes, class often related to housing, for instance. But you also have very strong dynamism to try to elaborate a lot of solutions and to invest public and private money. This is this Paris in the making that we try to analyze and to make obvious in this book. And we think that by doing that, we contribute to the understanding of different forms of political regulations that are emerging in big cities, both in Paris and in the rest of the world. Sciences Po.